Now, let's talk about real risk management. So we finished with window dressing. It's part of the game, and I feel sad that we have to do it, but it's easier to create a quantitative risk register than do no risk register at all sometimes. Again, I did not have a risk register, overall strategic risk register. I deleted it. We used to have it. I deleted it because it was completely unnecessary. And I had many other risk managements too. And I was able to illustrate to anyone who would ask that we have some of the most sophisticated risk managements on the planet. And by the way, this has been confirmed by the judges because last year I was named the best risk manager in Europe, and we've got a special honorable award from RIMS in US. So both in Europe and US, whatever we did was recognized as one of the best risk managements on the planet at the time. So seems to work. But if you do have to do a risk register, might as well do a quantitative one. And Heidi is saying window dressing is still needed. Unfortunately, yes. Again, sometimes I feel adventurous, and I have absolutely no problem fighting external auditors and insurance companies on their questionnaires and just refusing to show them what they want instead of showing them what I think they should have asked in the first place. But not everybody is adventurous, and I don't actually invite you to be adventurous. I think it's a waste of nerves and time. It's just easier to do window dressing. So, risk management 2. Let's talk about some real stuff now. So first, risk management 2, the underlying idea behind risk management 2 is that risk is a decision-making tool. Risk analysis supports decision-making. So what I would normally do when I join a new organization, and this is exactly what I did 3 years ago when I joined Eurochem, and this is exactly what I did 7 years ago when I joined the private equity fund. I would pick a pilot. I know it's a very soft phrase, but I would pick some sort of business process where I could see there could be an immediate and meaningful impact from risk analysis. For example, in my previous role, I picked investment decisions because that was the core function of the organization. And so they used to make investment decisions by adding a colorful heat map to the investment on one of the slides, like slide 150, and saying, well, by the way, here are 5 high risks that are associated with this deal. Be mindful of that. So we replaced that with some quantitative risk analysis, at least for the bigger deals. And we actually showed how those risks affect the cash flow and how they affect the NPV, did NPV at risk. And that was one example. In the previous job, we selected insurance as another pilot because there was a hypothesis that we were paying, and we had portfolio like nothing excessive, but like $20-30 million in insurance premiums per year, nothing groundbreaking. And there was a hypothesis from the CFO that we needed to investigate and figure it out because the insurance coverage was not fit to the underlying risks of the organization. We were insuring wrong things, we were underinsuring some things, overinsuring others, and we were definitely overpaying for whatever we were insuring. So we took that as the pilot. And we took one renewal at the time, one insurance type at the time, and then we investigated it, quantified the risk profile for each of the insurance types, even created a calculator for it. So I actually have a whole session on sharing an example because we ended up saving $13 million, which was approximately, I think, 40% of our annual insurance budget for one of the companies. And I think this is one of the reasons why I was named the best risk manager in Europe last year, because that was quite a groundbreaking saving, and we didn't do it by reducing limits. We actually increased limits quite dramatically. On some lines, we increased limits by 7 times. We increased limits by twice or 3 times on other lines. We didn't really touch the deductible. Sometimes we increased the deductibles, but that had very minor effect on savings. So it was pretty groundbreaking stuff. Like, we actually improved the quality of the wording of the policies, made them broader, not narrower, just through quantitative risk analysis, like very simple math, a very simple methodology. And so I'm sharing that part of the methodology in my other Risk Awareness Week session, which I did Wednesday last week. And so make sure you rewatch the replay, because there's I still think it's pretty amazing stuff that we've done, because it wasn't a fluke, it wasn't once off. We replicated it in Europe, London, US, Latin America, Eastern Europe, Asia, different brokers, different underwriters. Every time we would attempt to have a saving, like the savings totaled 13 million, but we saved 5 million on one, 1.2 million on another, 3 million on another, 500,000 on something else. Like, it was always amazing. And do you watch that workshop? If you're on the Risk Awareness Week website right now, just click on watch the workshops and Control F, look for my name, and there's a case study that I share, pretty detailed, and I'm actually showing a calculator that we ended up doing, because the math behind that specific decision was pretty simple. And that's another important point that I want to kind of deviate here, because risk management 1 requires quite basic competencies. You have to talk clearly, you have to be a good communicator, you have to show leadership skills, and you have to be able to color beautiful pictures. So not a very unique skill set. What I'm trying to say, knowing how to color different boxes is not that complicated. Of course, you do need to have your leadership skills to communicate with everybody else, and you need to sell it to the external auditors and to the rating agencies. So you need to be a good communicator, but other than that, no technical skills required. Like, you just color boxes. It's really simple things. Like, you don't need to have a math degree. However, once we start going into the risk management 2 territory, you literally have 4 options, and you tell me if you can think about other options, because I wrote an interesting article yesterday. I don't know if you saw it. 5 concerns every risk manager should have, and when I was writing it, I thought about 4 options, and you tell me if you can think of more. So option number 1 is hire a quant. And this is literally what I did. I actually hired 2 quants in my risk team that was responsible for insurance and operational and investment risk. They were the kind of the engines building the risk models for various decisions. And I was kind of the mastermind, figuring out which decisions we need a model for, and then figuring out the overall structure, kind of mapping out the model. Like, you can think of, I would be the person who would build the influence diagram or decision tree, and then I had 2 math geniuses that would actually put a stochastic model on top of my decision tree, or a bow tie. And so that's option 1. Option 2 is you can outsource the quantitative risk analysis, and this is what basically I do now. Since I resigned after the war started, I've been kind of freelancing, mainly focusing on Risk Awareness Week, but I've been freelancing and building some models for organizations. So you can outsource quantitative risk, like, you don't have to do it yourself. Option 3 is you can actually find software that automates the mathematical engine behind the calculator. So there are software packages that have the calculators built in. So for example, Archer Insight can press a button, convert your risk register into a quantitative risk register, generate the loss exceedance curve. Or it can, you build a bow tie and it can quantify the bow tie. Or you actually have, like, we're actually working on that at the moment, and hopefully it will be implemented as a module in the near future. You can actually plug in your claims data, and the calculator automatically fits the distribution, calculates the exceedance curves, calculates different deductibles and fair prices, and then you can plug in your different quotes that you received from the underwriters, and it actually recalculates the risk profile based on the quotes, and it gives you kind of the preferred options. It gives you a few options with ranking on which one seems to be a better coverage for your risk exposure. So option 3 is find a software that had math geniuses behind the scenes who automated the mathematical side, and then you can just kind of plug in the basic numbers, some of your assumptions and statistical data that every organization has, and it gives you the outputs. And option 4 is become a math genius yourself. And I hope Risk Awareness Week is a nice stepping stone to help you towards that journey, because I've spent a lot of effort trying to gather as many amazing speakers as possible who bring their expertise and show how they do it. And some of them show you their code, some of them show their models, and you can download and sample the models and kind of try and download the code and try it yourself. So for example, I used the first 3. So I don't consider, even though I have an actual degree in statistics, and I'm probably better than average at quantitative risk. At least I understand the distributions quite well, and I can definitely read them, and I can talk to them, and I can set the task for the modelers to do, and I can validate and backtest the models, but I wouldn't consider myself a math genius. And that's why I hired math geniuses. I outsourced, for example, I outsource a lot of engineering work to actual risk engineers, and I use software that automates the math for me. Yazan is asking a very interesting question. What is the reason for absence of risk management in government institutions, public sector? So the answer, I think, is very simple. You are thinking of government in your specific country, because, and hence you're making an assumption that every government is as immature in risk management as what you observed. That is actually not the case. If you look at Canadian government and the regulations that they issue, or if you look at Australian government and New Zealand governments, and the regulations and the frameworks and the methodologies that they're using, for example, I think in one of the states in Australia, in Victoria, I can't remember if it's federal or if it's just Victorian, there is, under the Ministry of Finance, there is VMIA, a whole section within the Ministry of Finance, I think it's Victorian specific, that is basically responsible for upskilling and educating and providing methodology for governments in state of Victoria on the topics of risk management, business continuity, and insurance. And even though they started really, really strong, and they kind of stayed at risk management 1, it's like the prettiest risk management 1 you can find, but probably still risk management 1. So it's not, the absence is not the right word. Governments in many parts of the world are using quite sophisticated risk management, because, for example, I wrote a maturity model for a state auditor, a auditor general in one of the Eastern European countries many years ago, that they used to then audit different ministries on risk management. And so absence is not the right word. It exists. Unfortunately, most of the risk management within the government organizations is risk management one. So it's basically do a pretty risk register. Most of the time, it's not even quantitative risk register, which in my mind is just an absolute waste of time. So yeah, I don't know why they don't move beyond risk management one. Maybe because government is kind of really playing in that window dressing space. Yeah, thanks, Sammy. It is in Victoria. So maybe because kind of government is really playing that window dressing game, and they just need evidence of presence of something. And most organizations, like for example, I used to do a lot of risk management for New South Wales State Parliament in Australia. I did a lot of risk management work for City of Sydney. So risk management in many government agencies in developed countries exists at the federal, state, and even local level. I did a lot of risk management for catchments, so like for like really local governments. So yeah, it exists. However, I wish it was risk management two. It is still very much risk management one. The only exception that I'm kind of proud of observing and being close to it is in New Zealand. Whenever you are participating in the government-private partnership, and you want to build some sort of infrastructure project together with the government funding, Ministry of Finance has a methodology that requires you to model schedule and cost risks, and you have to give them like P95, P5, like they request normal risk metrics. So I was very delighted to see that it exists. All right. So the first point on risk management one, integrating into decisions, and I still have a lot of things to say. So you can go grab a coffee, you can come back. I'll still be talking because I just wanted to kind of pile everything into this conversation. And if you're tired already, and we've been online for 55 minutes, I know it's a big task listening to me. You can just rewatch it later because this will be available as a recording both on the Risk Academy, on the Risk Awareness website, on YouTube, LinkedIn, YouTube. Risk Academy YouTube is probably these. By the way, thank you for Monty to becoming a member on the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It's really easy to find. You go youtube.com/@ like in the email Risk Academy, and it finds the channel. So first point that I wanted to touch on, just integrating into some of the decisions. No, we don't integrate into every decision. That's way too complicated and way too time consuming. We're implementing into some of the decisions, and we usually start with one decision, like one very pragmatic where we can immediately make some money for the shareholders. Again, I am a big believer that whatever quantitative risk analysis we do, it better save some money, because otherwise what's the point? It's actually quite time consuming and takes a lot of effort. And unless it pays for itself, it seems like a very silly thing, silly thing to do. Okay, so the point number one is to integrate into decisions, you need to either have some quants in your team, outsource the quant, use the software that automates the quant, or become a quant yourself. There's really no kind of dancing around it. If you don't have none of that, then kind of move on to the next stage, or start with something else. And I suspect you would find it difficult to do proper risk analysis. That being said, in my experience, it is really a no-brainer. So for example, I hired risk engineers to walk with me and the team around all of our chemical plants and go into every room and investigate every piece of equipment. It wasn't cheap, but it was less than 0.5% of the money we saved on the actual insurance literally 2 months later. So in my mind, outsourcing quantitative risk analysis or buying a license for the software that does risk analysis is such a no-brainer because the cost is minuscule compared to the savings that you can get. Like we saved millions of dollars, and just because we spent tens of thousands on some service providers to collect data for us so we could quantify it, and I hired an extra quant and paid his salaries and all the admin costs and his bonuses, all of that was nothing compared to just one insurance renewal. Like literally within a week, we paid for all of this for the next 10 years. Like we paid for all of his salaries for the next 10 years within a week. So in my mind, quantitative risk analysis is kind of really a no-brainer. You just maybe it's probably difficult to imagine if you've never done this before. And the good news is you have plenty of people at the Risk Awareness Week, all the speakers. You can just ask, like if you look at the workshop and somebody tells you a nice example, reach out to the speaker, ask them about their experience. Because you can ask me a lot of questions about insurance, for example, or operational risk or investment risk. There's a good chance I've done most of that, and we saved actually a lot of money. Now, the second big choice on this slide is every risk manager has to make a decision. Do they keep the risk analysis within their team, or do they build the templates, build the tools, and give it back to the actual decision makers, to the personnel? For example, insurance decisions we kept. Environmental decisions, we build like water pollution, air pollution. We actually built calculators for quantifying those risk exposures. We gave it back to the environmental team. We give them we're giving them training. We found a couple of people who got it. Like we gave training to maybe like 15 people, and we knew that 2 people got it. And we just kind of built the relationship with these two people. And we gave them back and let them do their own risk analysis. So it's a very important choice that every risk manager needs to make. Whenever you implement a decision, at some stage you have to decide, do you keep the risk analysis yourself? And it has a significant resource implications, because then if they make this decision every day, that means you have to generate risk analysis every day. If they make the decision, and then it means you have to automate it because you can't physically do risk analysis. So for example, market and credit risk, not my team, but the team next to me, the other risk management team responsible for credit risk and another risk management team responsible for market risk, they kept the quantification. And then of course they had to automate it completely because it is impossible to recalculate all these VARs on a daily basis and do it accurately manually because of the volume of transactions happening globally. So the second big decision is, do you keep the risk analysis or do you give it back? There are pros and cons on each one. My general preference has always been give it back as much as possible. Let the other teams do their risk analysis. As long as you build them the techniques, the tools, the templates, and you've trained them, they should be able to do it. Then of course they can come and ask you for methodological advice. But I actually kept very few risks that I would be responsible for quantifying.